want to see my dog?
Here you go, that's my dog. What's up, Winston? Tell him hello. Sit. 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 Down. Down. Lay down. Oh no. Well, maybe he doesn't listen that good. Okay, today's lecture is 5.4 Government Regulation of Business. The word regulation should not be a new one to you. You should have some memory of it. Regulation. Regulations are rules imposed by the government in order to achieve some kind of goal. So maybe a rule that your car needs to get 40 miles to the gallon by the year 2025. Alright, that's the goal of that is to use less oil and to have a more clean air environment. Or maybe a regulation is that you cannot build your house on this area of land because they're wetlands and they're fragile and they need to be protected so that animals don't die out. Or maybe your regulation is that everyone that works in your coal mine must wear a helmet and must be trained on safety, what to do in case of an emergency. So there are lots of different regulations. Those are just a couple examples. Alright, and as we learned in our previous lecture, the government got involved in regulating business at first during the industrial era, that kind of gilded age in which business was booming, but at the expense of the average working man and woman. And that maybe capitalism had a dark side, and there were some ill effects of it. So, for example, monopolies kind of grew out of control, or an oligopoly, which is monopoly is one owner controls a whole slew of businesses. Oligopoly is just a few people control a whole slew of businesses. Working conditions were becoming atrocious. You could get your arm cut off in a machine, and the result from your employer is that you'd be fired because you didn't have two good working arms, and there was nothing that could protect you as a worker. There was unsafe and unhealthy products. Jumping way ahead here past the industrial era to the 20th century, you had books like The Jungle. Actually, that was written during the Industrial Revolution, and that was about a guy that worked at a meat plant, and all the gross stuff that he saw, like rats falling in the machines and still being served in the meat, or people falling in the machines and still being served in the meat. The story goes that Teddy Roosevelt read this book while he was president, and it disgusted him so much that he insisted that Congress pass the Meat Inspection Act. Or how about Rachel Carson? She wrote a book called Silent Spring, and that was about pesticides. At the time, pesticides were being widely used. Certain ones that had, I think it was DDT, a chemical that would turn out to cause cancer, and she wrote a book saying that she had observed that birds were dying who ate these vegetables that were out in the fields, and how good could this be for people. And then Unsafe at Any Speed, and this was written by Ralph Nader in 1965, basically saying that certain cars were really unsafe, and that perhaps we needed to put something in them like seat belts. Ralph Nader would go on to run for president unsuccessfully lots of different times, but he wrote this book, Unsafe at Any Speed, and it led to the kind of modern car safety that we have today. Also, back in the day, we had business bribery of politicians in order to get their way or keep their way. So the growth of such abusive practices by monopolies led to the government getting more involved and having a kind of anti-monopoly point of view, or an antitrust point of view. A trust is a synonym for monopoly. Alright? It does not mean that all monopolies are bad. Okay, it does not necessarily mean that all monopolies are bad. Some, in fact, are okay, like your power company, your garbage company. These things, it's hard to find competition in order to compete with the power company, for instance. So it's not all monopolies are bad, but the policy of the government became to break up and get rid of the abusive monopolies. Let's see. Okay. An example of laws that were passed by the government in regards to monopolies, all of these have in common, whether it's the Sherman Antitrust Act, the Clayton Act, or the Federal Trade Commission Act, they all basically said that the government was going to get more involved in breaking up and destroying harmful monopolies. Okay? And over time, the government would create regulatory commissions like the FCC. What do they regulate? Radio. Or the SEC. That one's harder. What do they regulate? Stock market trading. What else is there? How about the EPA? What do they regulate? The environment. All right, and companies that deal with the environment. So in what has happened in recent years? Well, it seems like maybe our enforcing of the anti-monopoly laws has become a little more relaxed. Okay, under Reagan and Bush, they intentionally hired less people for the FTC and the antitrust division in order to discourage them doing anything. So, you know, like I've said before, the Republican belief is one that is pro-business, and that often means kind of being a little more okay with the growth of some businesses like Time Warner Cable and AOL merging, or what was another one that just happened? How about the cable companies, right? Comcast and Time Warner Cable have merged, and a lot of people are saying, where's the government? Why isn't the government stopping them from merging? Because now they can essentially raise the price because a lot of people don't have a lot of other choice for cable companies. And what we've seen in recent years is that these mergers have exploded. There's much more mergers like XM and Sirius Satellite Radio, and the government is kind of just staying quiet about it. The only thing where there was recently a lawsuit was, it's been a long time now, 10 or 15 years since Microsoft was told something to do with Windows and Internet Explorer, that they were trying to establish a monopoly on the browser, and that they had to allow people to install other internet browsers. That's tough. I kind of barely remember it. So other than Microsoft, the government has barely said anything about monopoly in recent years. And a good example, again, is the merger that just occurred between Comcast and Time Warner Cable. You remember this other merger I told you about, Time Warner and AOL? That the lady that ran the antitrust division that approved it would go on to become on the board of directors for Time Warner Cable. So, I'm going to file that under shady. Very shady that after she retired, she got a very high-paying job. And this, it kind of shows that our government has some little problems, almost nearly bordering on corruption, possibly. Alright, businesses claim that with strong foreign competition, they need to be able to consolidate in order to stay competitive with the other countries of the world, and that requires big, large businesses to be able to compete. In the early 2000s, I was in high school, and California deregulated their energy markets. Alright, so the California government was very involved before in our power companies, and like many Republican beliefs, the governor of California deregulated the power company, and it resulted in a little bit of problems. I remember the power going out a lot when I was in high school, and prices skyrocketed for power. President Bush looked at the situation and said that California's problems were a result of their own policy, and therefore he was not going to get involved. So it's just another example of the federal government not getting involved in an area they possibly could have. And in 2008, here's another one. Remember that housing crash? I bet you looked around your neighborhood and you saw a whole bunch of houses in your neighborhood that were empty because people had mortgages, and they chose to walk away from their homes. You know, perhaps the banks were giving loans to people that didn't deserve to have a loan, and yet not a ton has changed since 2008 to regulate the banks, to tell them, like, hey, stop loaning money to people who can't have it. So because of the way that the banks were behaving, it hurt all of us as homeowners. Maybe even you guys aren't living in the same house you lived in before 2008 because of this housing collapse. So some people say we need to do more regulation of business because it will help prevent unhealthy monopolies and oligopolies that existed since the Industrial Revolution. It'll help protect us as customers and consumers from unsafe and unhealthy products. You know, you can have regulation to say no more lead in my kids' toys because I don't want them to eat it and get sick. Um, you can say that it helps protect consumers from unsafe policies. We've had regulations where, like, pilots cannot fly more than a certain amount of hours per shift, or how about truck drivers on the road? They're not allowed to drive more than a certain amount of hours before they have to pull over and just take a break and go to bed and rest. We had airline inspections where a plane has to constantly pass inspection to make sure that it's safe to fly. I don't know about you, but I am glad that my pilot is forced to not be able to fly more than a certain amount of hours every 48 hours. Regulations help protect people from unsafe working conditions. You're not going to get your arm cut off at work anymore. And if you do, maybe it's because you're just really stupid and you weren't paying attention to all the signs and you went behind some gates you weren't supposed to go behind. So work is much more safe due to regulation. And it protects the poor or the consumers who lack a strong voice in government. Maybe the average person can't really do anything, but with the help of regulation, it helps level the playing field with giant corporations who maybe are only interested in earning money. But there are arguments against regulation too, for why maybe we shouldn't regulate. Argument number one is that the market would fix regulation. A lot of people say, just let the market figure it out. Let the market figure it out. Whenever we had that bell working class about should a business owner be able to not serve a gay couple, a lot of you guys said, let the market figure it out. People just won't use that flower guy and he'll go out of business. Well, a lot of people say the same thing for, let's say, if you have lead in your toys and you're selling toys, well, the market will figure it out. People will hear you have lead in your toys and they'll stop buying your product. So maybe you don't need regulation because people will just be smart enough. How about regulation is inefficient? Businesses have to hire a bunch of people to comply with these regulations. Let's say if you're a toy company and you can't have a toy smaller than a certain size because a kid might choke on it, they have to hire people and do research and make sure that the toy is not dangerous, and maybe that costs them money and they don't want to have to pay that money. Because it costs money, you could argue that regulation kills jobs because it lessens our competitiveness with the rest of the world. And when you're less competitive, then you're going to lose business, and when you lose business, you're going to lose jobs. You could also argue that regulation increases prices. All right, if you can't have lead in your toys, but you have to come up with some alternative. Let's say you're a toy maker. I don't know what they use now instead of lead. They use, I don't know, acrylic paint, because maybe acrylic paint doesn't cause cancer, but that costs more than lead. Lead is super cheap, but acrylic paint is expensive. Well, they're not just gonna pay that cost and keep charging the same amount for toys. They're gonna pass that cost on to you. So suddenly your Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle action figure or your little Buddha statue is gonna cost more money because of the ingredients that are in it. So the prices that the costs that increase for the maker are always going to be passed on to the buyer, which is us. You could also argue that regulations have become increasingly unreasonable. I talked before about my buddy that built cell phone towers and how if they kill this endangered turtle when they're on the job, they have to pay like $20,000 each time that it happens. Other examples are that farmers cannot use part of their land because of some rodent on the endangered species list that lives there. Or how about loggers that are cutting down trees can no longer cut down trees because there's a spotted owl who's endangered who lives there. So instead all the loggers no longer have a job because the whole forest is protected. Anything regulation you could argue harms the people. I think I wanted to talk about it, but maybe it fits down here best. A lot of times what you find, if I'm a company and America says, you need to do this, and you need to do that, and we're going to come inspect you, and we're going to make it tough on you, what's my reaction going to be, do you think? If I'm a business and America wants me to do all this, I'm going to say, you know what, forget this. I'm going to move my factory to Thailand, or I'm going to move my factory to China, or Malaysia, or the Philippines, where I don't have to deal with all these crazy regulations. So regulation kills jobs is where that would fit under, that a lot of businesses leave because of the regulations that America has. Like everything else that we learn in this class, are regulations bad? No, I don't think so. Can regulations go too far and kill jobs and do bad things? Yeah, they can. So understand the arguments on both sides. If you're a Democrat, you probably want to increase regulation on business. You want to pass laws to stop home prices, from totally crashing like they did in 2008. You want to increase regulation. If you're a Republican, you're pro-business, and you're going to be against regulation because it hurts the business owner. And the idea is that hurts the American people too. Okay, remember, do your study guide, answer the questions on Schoology, and write a one-paragraph summary if you printed out your notes. Peace.